Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tiffany Feingold. I am the co founder and CEO of Guiding Bright Minds. Today, you are joining us for a free parent webinar called Why is My Child Struggling in School? Understanding the Hidden Reasons. And I'm so excited to have with us today Dr. Ramya Rangamanar. She is a psychologist with Horizon Neuropsychological Services and is going to be talking to us and walking through these. And I just want to commend all of you for being here today because I know it takes an hour out of your day, out of your time. But I love the commitment as we have offered these free parent webinars now for going on almost 5 years. And I am just humbled by the response that we have of those that are still constantly seeking information and guidance. Let me share a little bit before we dive into the presentation about Guiding Bright Minds. So I'm a parent myself of a neurodivergent child, and I know how overwhelming and exhausting that road can be. And so as I was going through my own journey, I noticed that there really wasn't a resource out there to support parents, kind of an all encompassing resource. And so that's when I decided to start Guiding Bright Minds to say, come to Guiding Bright Minds, go to our website. You can find hundreds of different articles on all kinds of different topics, from IEPs to potty training. What is autism? What's ADHD? What's dyslexia? So much content is out there. But the biggest thing that I love about our website is our directory of providers. And it's not just a directory of providers, it's truly a community that works together to help stop those damaging stereotypes, stigmas, to help parents. My passion is with you parents because I do understand. You feel like you are so judged in every decision that we make. And I wanted parents to make sure that you felt that you had a community that gets it, that understands. And just like Dr. Ramya and her services, they are part of the Guiding Bright Minds community. And I've personally met with all of these providers to inquire about how are they helping us? What does that look like? And hopefully creating an ease for you of knowing that the Guiding Bright Minds directory does have those providers that are kind of vetted, but also committed to being really supportive of you, your child, and your family as a whole. So I'm excited about that. I do want to make some announcements. If you go to our website as well, you will see a list of events that are happening out in the community, not just Guiding Bright Minds events, but also the events that our providers have. So if they're doing a family workshop, if they're doing another webinar, if they have an open house or some sort of event, you will find all of that on the www.guidingbrightminds.com website. I also want to share that I'm excited. It's going to be our fourth annual Neurodiversity Resource Fair. That's going to be on June 13th. It's at the Denver Academy campus, located in Denver, Colorado. And we have about 100 vendors. There's going to be a bounce house, face painting, mini horses are going to be there, balloon art, all kinds of fun food activities. So you can bring your family. They will all have a great time while you as parents are connecting with these amazing professionals dedicated to serving you. I also want to mention on our website, we are also partnering with the Colorado Autism Society and Monkey Business, and we are offering a birthday buddy program. If you have kids between ages 4 and 9, so it's starting kind of young, this is the first year for this pilot. As this, depending on how this looks and how this goes, we're going to eventually do some also birthday buddies for older kids as well. But if you have a kid that is between ages 4 and 9, one is going to be in Westminster, one is going to be in Parker, so kind of north and southish areas. Look online on our website and find the information about birthday buddies and how you can attend. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Ramya, to get started. And we are going to allow for questions and answers at the end. So if you can go to either the chat or the Q&A section. Definitely want to have that opportunity to answer any of your questions as we go through, and a copy of the presentation and a video will be a copy of the Zoom link will be sent to you all. Thanks for joining. All right, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for having me and for allowing me the opportunity to give this presentation. It's something that I am pretty passionate about, and I love the space to be able to connect with people and parents specifically. So thank you very much. And I appreciate all of you being here today and taking an hour out of your day to listen to me chat about this. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Right. I believe everybody should be able to see my presentation at this point. So the chosen topic for the day is understanding why is my child struggling in school, understanding the hidden stories or reasons behind that. And as Tiffany mentioned, I am a pediatric neuropsychologist. And with that, I work with children and adolescents, many of whom are bright, capable, and full of potential, but who are often struggling in different ways, often academics being one of those big ways. And today we're going to unpack what those reasons can be behind and give some framework to understanding the reason behind that academic struggle. Okay. So first and foremost, I think it's probably helpful to tell you what in the world is a neuropsychologist and what do we do? So I am first and foremost a licensed psychologist with 2 years of additional training in not only pediatrics and the developing brain, but understanding brain and behavior relationships. So behavior, translating from behavior often to the brain-based side of things. So with the evaluations that we do, we want to understand why is this happening? What could be driving these patterns that we're seeing? Additionally, what are this child's strengths? And how do we support effectively? I'm going to start by talking about the stories that we tell ourselves. Does any of this sound familiar to folks? Homework takes hours. There are emotional meltdowns happening over small things, not just academic things. Your child is smart, but not performing to expectations, avoiding schoolwork in general, or needing constant reminders to get things done, both in school and at home. If any of this sounds familiar, this is what we are going to unpack today. Okay. Now, how these struggles that I just mentioned are often described or interpreted. Those are all behaviors that I just listed. And these are all characteristics of children. Unmotivated or lazy, distractible, resistant, oppositional, emotional, inconsistent. And these are descriptions of that behavior, but they're not explanations for why that behavior is happening. 2 children can look distracted, but for completely different reasons. One may struggle with attention, while another might be overwhelmed, and another might be having boredom or other reasons as to what is driving that issue or that behavior. So making sense of what we see. When a child struggles, our brain automatically tries to explain that. This is not a flaw in parenting or anything like that. This is human behavior because we try to interpret behavior and understand it. And as adults, we're wired to make that quick interpretation. And if we interpret the behavior that we see as laziness, then we often respond with pressure. More pressure is needed to push the child to do more. If we interpret their behavior as defiance, we respond with consequences, often punishment or taking away of different things. If we interpret their behavior as a lack of ability, then slowly we sort of minimize or lessen the amount of expectations that are on a child. But none of this, neither of these, any of these ways in which we respond are not actually the ways in which we can support children best, because we don't actually have the right information for interpreting their behavior. Behavior is information in our world. And what we observe as behavior can reflect many different things. It can reflect a cognitive overload, a limited capacity to regulate oneself, processing speed or inefficiencies, or stress response. And this behavior often points to where the support is needed. And without understanding the process or the reason behind the behavior, we risk applying the wrong solution to this. So just to underscore, the same behavior can reflect different brain processes. The plot thickens. Learning itself is a brain process. It's not a single skill, it's a coordinated system. So first we have attention, and that's what gets in. If attention is inconsistent, the brain may miss key pieces of information from the start, and you can't process what never fully even entered a system. Next, working memory is what we hold and use. This is sort of our mental workspace that allows a child to remember multi-step directions, organize ideas while they're writing, carry numbers over, doing math equations. And if working memory is taxed, instructions seem to disappear. Next, we have processing speed. That's how efficiently and effectively and accurately we can work. So some children might understand the material perfectly, but they process it more slowly. And that means they need more time and expend more energy over the course of a day. And executive functioning. This is how we plan and manage tasks, including organization of materials, starting assignments, shifting between tasks, prioritizing what matters, and monitoring our work. It's a management system overall. Emotion regulation determines whether we can think well under stress. If we're anxious, frustrated, embarrassed, then we're unable to access all of our good cognitive resources. And lastly, socially, if we are having troubles in interpreting our surroundings, or we're expending a lot of energy in doing so, or the sensory environment is too much for us in a classroom, that also pulls away from learning as a process. And lastly, academic skills themselves. Reading, writing, math skills, these foundations and acquisition of these skills happens in a stepwise fashion, but not for all kids. And so this process, along with all of these other processes, are behind learning. And you'll see throughout this presentation, when one system is strained, the learning feels harder, even for bright and capable children. Okay. Performance versus process. Performance data, these are the things we get from schools. Grades, we have test scores, we have benchmarks, standardized test measures. And that does give us very important information. Process is what tells us what's behind that. How did we get to that point? How did we meet that benchmark? So how the information is processed, how the effort is regulated, and how those demands are managed over time. So in one scenario, a student may be underperforming. And if we only looked at performance, we might assume that there's a lack of effort or ability. But when we understand the process behind it, we might discover a working memory strain or a processing speed strain, anxiety, or executive vulnerabilities interfering with that output. Now, some students can do quite well while on these performance measures, but still be struggling. And in those scenarios, these students might have strong reasoning skills, they have good verbal abilities, high motivation, and this drives that. They can compensate with those strengths. However, they are working much harder than their peers in these situations. They may spend twice as long on homework, rely more heavily on parent support. They may stay up late checking assignments, and they may come home exhausted and emotionally depleted. So doing well does not always mean that things feel manageable. And in my line of work, we often ask, at what cost? What cost is this child meeting that standard or grade? Now, there are state and standardized testing measures that give us a good measure of curriculum mastery. They assess whether a child is at grade level expectation. And they are monitoring the system, the district or the school as a whole to understand how these academic benchmarks are being met on the whole. And this is important information about whether a child is meeting that grade level expectation. However, what these standardized tests don't capture as well is the process behind, whether there are executive functioning challenges, working memory challenges, attention, or emotion regulation difficulties. So if we only look at those outcomes, we're missing that process behind. And so the story goes. I am going to, in this next part of the presentation, bring in 5 different examples of kids that I've worked with, and their names have been changed for privacy, but just to illustrate different ways in which there are hidden stories behind the concerns. Each one of these children that I'll talk about came in primarily because their parents were worried about school performance in some way or school engagement in some way. First, let me tell you about Liam. Liam is 9 years old and in 4th grade. And his parents first reached out because every afternoon Liam would come home, it was a battle. Homework would start with reminders, please sit down, please get started. And within minutes, Liam would be bouncing out of his chair, trying to find anything and everything to do before sitting down to do his homework. And eventually, even once he got started, there were tears. Sometimes his parents, because of how frustrating that process became. And we could tell, when parents came to us that they were at their wits' end in knowing how to support. And homework completion was the biggest concern for them and an area where they were in a power struggle. And at school, teachers described Liam as bright, creative, talkative, but assignments were incomplete and tests had some missing portions or incomplete testing. And in general, Liam could be off task in the classroom. And over time, Liam began feeling as though he was just bad at schoolwork as well. In the mornings, he started complaining about stomach aches, and parents had some concerns about anxiety as well. And through an evaluation, we had some more info came out. We were able to see that there was actually a true weakness in Liam's attentional system, and a deficit in comparison to peers. So the same thing that was requiring his peers were doing required him a lot more effort to put forth. And he was a kid who wanted to do well, which is why secondarily there was anxiety coming up about performing. So if we only read the behaviors of homework not being completed as a performance output, or the anxious behaviors of stomach aches, we don't get the full picture of this actually being driven by an attentional issue. Through that, we were able to bring in supports as well that helped him manage that attention better in the classroom, at home, transition into homework better, and accommodations that were able to support him. Now, attention is not one skill. We like to think of it as one. Can your child pay attention or not? Can we pay attention or not? And it's truly multifaceted. There's sustained focus required. There's filtering of distractions. There's holding information in mind. There's keeping pace with what's happening around us and the learning that's occurring. And of course, there's regulating emotions, which we'll talk more about. So understanding which part of attention is driving the challenge is also important. It's not just an overall focus issue, but what we do specifically to support that type of challenge that's happening. And different weaknesses can look like the same problem. And again, I'll go back to what executive functioning is because it's so important for learning on the whole. This is where we plan and organize, manage our time and materials, we shift between tasks, regulate emotions, monitor effort. And just because a child has strong intelligence does not mean that there is a strong executive system there. And too often we conflate the two. Now I have a little myth buster moment. My child can focus great on video games, and they're just choosing not to focus on their schoolwork. I hear that a lot. And of course, video games are super engaging. They pull for points and sounds and visual imagery that is very captivating to any child. Absolutely. And that is often a preferred task for many children. An interest can temporarily support that attention. And depending on how captivating that activity is, we will absolutely be able to draw in and engage that child more. But that does not change the fact that there might be some underlying and pervasive issues with attention. Take us to another scenario here of Carly. Carly is 8 years old and in the 3rd grade. And from the time she was little, it was clear that she was very bright. She basically taught herself to read early on. She used words that were far beyond her age. She asked big and abstract questions about how the brain works and space and time. And on standardized tests at school, she scored well above grade level. But by 3rd grade, her teacher began noticing a pretty puzzling pattern. She was acing the quizzes and tests, and when called on, she could answer appropriately. But her independent classwork was frequently incomplete. And writing assignments were half finished or minimal. Math was also something that when it was given to her, she was often off task. Sometimes she would stare blankly at her paper and then turn in almost nothing. Sometimes the teacher would find her doing her own projects and engaging in other things while she was supposed to be doing classwork. Parents made comments such as, she's capable of so much more if she would just apply herself. She seems unmotivated. So, in my time with Carly and the testing that we did, we actually found quite a gifted profile, scores that were well above her same age peers. And through that, we understood that there was a gap between where her brain could process and was functioning and wanted to function, and what the school material was the pace it was going at and the content of it. And so the challenge was not there for her. There was boredom that looked like inattention, but truly was actually more of a gifted mind that needed more advanced pacing and advanced curriculum. This also helped us clarify this and go down the right pathway of solutions in the classroom and outside of the classroom on how we can support her brain in continuing this advanced development that she has. Taking a moment here to talk about giftedness a little bit more closely. This can create some unique learning challenges. Of course, we want to support the giftedness that's there, but it often results in some uneven development. So there can be advanced thinking or reasoning skills, but age typical regulation. And sometimes with these kiddos, we forget because of how they talk or their vocabulary or the way that they reason, we forget their age. And we forget that they might have the emotional or the attentional regulation of an 8-year-old. But that gap to them with where their reasoning skills are is also important. There's often perfectionism or fear of making mistakes in gifted children. And underdeveloped executive skills can also be there. So some hidden or masked weaknesses can come out because the giftedness carries them through for a fair amount of time. But then as demands increase, so can the challenges. And that's when parents often come to us. So high ability or high intelligence does not automatically mean that academics are going to be easy or the functioning academically is going to be easy. Another myth bust moment. My child is gifted, so they'll figure it out eventually. Also not true. The reality or the research tells us that giftedness can be domain specific. Meaning they can be gifted in a certain area and not all areas. Actually being gifted in all areas is quite uncommon or rare. Development is often asynchronous or uneven, with some being much higher and some being age appropriate. But we want to watch out for the things that are underdeveloped or below that of peers. And those strengths or that giftedness can mask that until they don't. Until it comes to a head, school becomes challenging or home life becomes challenging, behavior tells us and gives us that evidence. Taking us through to our third case of Sophia. Sophia is 13 years old and in 8th grade. She has pretty much always been the responsible one, organized, polite, high achieving. Teachers describe her as the teacher's pet, conscientious, and driven. But by middle school, something changed. She would sit at her desk for hours, not distracted, not defiant, just there. And larger assignments began eliciting an emotional response from her or overwhelm. She would reread directions repeatedly. She often procrastinated tasks and larger projects. And her parents worried that she was losing motivation and all this steam that she had. Teachers saw it as avoidance, avoidance of school. She even began refusing to go to school at some points. And during the evaluation, with deeper understanding of Sophia, we understood just how deep her anxiety was and how that really was arresting a lot of her learning capacity or learning capabilities. This stressed her cognitive system and was leading to refusal and avoidance. She was actually staying up without her parents' knowledge and late into the night, sort of rehashing and reviewing and over analyzing all of her schoolwork to ensure perfection. She even had some compulsive traits there of needing to do something at a very specific time, finishing something at a certain time, so that she could get a perfect grade on it. And perfection was something she strived for. And this is where the outward behavior told us that something was going on, but not the whole story. And so intervention focused on anxiety first, some behavioral strategies that would assist her in managing that anxiety when it comes up, some physical or body-based, breathing-based things that she could do to work through anxiety, and executive functioning support, because that it was a system that was being tapped by her anxiety. Anxiety is also a brain process. I think far too quickly we think of emotions or mood as something that's not in the brain or not something that originates in the brain. And, for a moment, just walk with me through this example here where you are out in the wilderness, walking through the tall grass, and suddenly you see a lion. And in that moment, your brain does not pause to analyze that situation. It doesn't think about long-term goals or weigh things effectively or rationally. Your nervous system goes into action. It quickens your heart rate. It quickens your breath. Your blood shifts to large muscle groups to put you into fight, flight, or freeze mode. Whatever we think will save us in that life-threatening situation. Now, in this situation, Sophia's brain is interpreting schoolwork as the lion, and the fight, flight, or freeze situation or response is being activated when there's not a truly life-threatening situation happening. So, of course, the nervous system is engaged and is overly activated in that moment. And all of this mental energy is going towards that threat in terms of monitoring whether we're safe or not. And an anxious brain prioritizes that safety over learning and learning processes. So this can result in procrastination, planning becoming rigid or avoidant. Our ability to be cognitively flexible narrows. Perfectionism can increase. And our actual time can start to be consumed by anxiously driven behaviors like the compulsions that I talked about. Another myth busting moment. They're just being dramatic. Of course, I know none of you say that, but these are things that I do hear occasionally. But anxiety is truly a physiological stress response. It's not a choice or an exaggeration. When it comes up in a situation that isn't truly life-threatening, that's what we call generalized anxiety disorder. When it comes up in that way and is chronic and impairing. And that means that the brain's threat system, the fire alarm, is constantly going off in that child's brain. And we have to manage that to elicit or to better the downstream executive functioning challenges that are happening because of it. All right, on to our fourth case. Now, let me tell you about Noah. Noah is 11 years old and in fifth grade, has a pretty impressive vocabulary, and can tell you lots about marine biology, probably most than most adults. And parents came in to us because school was falling apart. Academically, teachers reported increasingly incomplete classwork, refusal even to participate, especially when there were group projects. work quality that fluctuated dramatically. One day would be high, another day would be low. And he even started showing some emotional outbursts in school, which were highly embarrassing and escalating, almost to the point where the school didn't know how to manage or appropriately support that. So the school came to the parents, and the parents came to us. And when we got to know Noah, we understood a lot more about what was happening. Um, During the evaluation, Noah showed very solid, if not strong, intellectual ability. And that really resonated with the family in terms of his ability to learn about new subjects and teach them to himself. That marine biology was very prominent for him. Um, and academically, he was capable too. He performed well above age and grade expectations on measures of reading, writing, and math. However, what did emerge was a challenge for him within the social and emotional development for him. Socially, he had troubles communicating effectively and understanding social cues in the classroom. Sensory regulation was challenging for him, and sitting in the seat that he was in, he really couldn't focus because the seat felt very sensitive to his body. He had a rigidity about him that made it hard for him to persist through tasks if he didn't understand why he needed to do that or why he needed to show his work. And he would increasingly refuse those things if he didn't understand them and didn't understand why. And eventually, Noah was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. But this helped us understand why it is he was responding in school that way. Why it is the refusal was happening. That this wasn't a capacity or an aptitude issue, but a social and emotion regulation issue. Now, social and emotion regulation, that's our ability to read social and emotional cues and regulate them, process them, manage them, and respond to them effectively. If this is a challenged area for a child, that leads them to not tolerate frustration very well. So the second something becomes hard or feels like we don't understand why, an emotional response can happen. That emotional response can look external, like an outburst or crying or sensitivity, but it can also be internal and can come up in school, like withdrawal or shutting down or avoidance. It's harder for these kids to recover from mistakes or take criticism. It's harder for them to ask for help when they need it, to navigate peer collaboration and group work, interpreting teacher feedback appropriately, and to manage transitions or the sensory environment of a school. So social and emotional regulation are learning tools. They're not just extras. They are part of the learning process. Emotions and learning are connected. They rely on the same brain systems as attention and flexibility. And I think, again, I think far too often we think of emotions as something that isn't in the brain, but these processes are mediated by the same thing that we talk about: attention and regulation and flexibility. So we need to manage that effectively. And when we're stressed or when there are challenges in emotion regulation, that reduces our access to the good cognitive resources or reserve that we have. If you're seeing big reactions and often geared towards school, that doesn't mean there's that often reflects that there's a limited capacity here in some way, shape, or form. Moving to our last child to discuss today, Ava. Ava is 16 and a 10th grader. Her parents came in because her grades were dropping. Teachers were reporting late and incomplete assignments. declining performances specifically in English and history, an increasing avoidance of class participation. Reading heavy courses had become overwhelming. Essays for her that were definitely longer took much longer for her to complete, and she was exhausted. She had reduced motivation, was feeling tired all the time, could sleep at the drop of a hat, and was starting to feel quite low in self-esteem about herself as a student. And signs that parents were saying, I think she's just given up. Now, this story actually starts much earlier for Ava. When we go back in understanding who Ava was in elementary school and middle school, we actually learned that there were subtle but present differences in her reading and writing abilities, especially in comparison to how smart she was otherwise, and her math performances. And in elementary and middle school, she was actually more often described as anxious. And she was effortful in all academic tasks and really wanted to perform well. But over time, what happened for her is that these demands of learning increased. We moved from learning to read to reading to learn. And reading became the foundation of her learning in general. And because that was a much slower and effortful process for her, and reading became more dense, writing became more dense, that's why it took until she was in high school for this to come to a head. And at some point, that parent narrative that did say, I think she just gave up, does have some truth in the sense that she tried for so long to tread water and survive that at some point it just became too much. And refusing sometimes is a way that children tell us this is too much. Because if we don't try, and if we don't turn in that assignment or study, we don't have to deal with the consequence of a low performance or a low grade. And if we're going to get that low grade anyways, even with all of this effort that we're putting in, why would I try? So sometimes that narrative builds for kids without the right supports in place. But thankfully, we were able to not only identify this challenge, but it also, I think parents can think it's too late to intervene in the high school years, and it is not. We were able to support with accommodations, but also with intervention that helped increase the reading fluency, the reading comprehension, and not surprisingly, when given the right supports, Ava became that student once again, the one that was effortful and was able to reduce the amount of effort she was putting in just to survive and actually enjoy academics again. Note here, Ava was eventually diagnosed with a specific learning disability in reading and writing, or otherwise known as dyslexia. And because she was so smart, she was able to cover that up for a long time and push through with memorization. But through testing, we were able to see that type of challenge for her and how effortful reading comprehension of really dense material was. And that's what history is, that's what English classes are, and even math becomes a reading based subject at times with word problems. Now, a learning disability is when there's a specific academic skill deficit in reading, writing, or math. And this doesn't reflect often an IQ deficit of any kind. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's attentional or executive functioning issues either. But once again, the behavior or the outward presentation might look that way. I often find that learning disability children with learning disabilities come in, usually with depression or anxiety because of how they're doing in school, and the struggle that they're feeling around it and how long they've tried without support. One last myth busting moment here. It's just a COVID gap. I hear this often. And COVID has a very real impact. The COVID-19 pandemic did have a real impact on learning. And learning went remote, and there were absolutely gaps in learning for many students. Persistent and skill-specific weaknesses often predated the pandemic. So there might have been subtle attentional challenges before, subtle social emotional challenges before, subtle learning challenges before, and human behavior, of course, and parent behavior will automatically say, clearly, those 1 to 2 years where they went remote impacted their reading and their writing and their math. And that is not untrue. But through these types of evaluations, we are able to understand what predated that, how COVID or things like COVID could impact learning, and what remains to be true. And what gains are they making after, now that they're back in the school. So gaps due to instruction look different from what processing-based difficulties would look like, or reading-specific based difficulties would look like. And that's why understanding the process behind this is important. Right. Understanding the script. Again, I'm going to go back to this notion that the same behavior has different meanings. Through each of these cases that I spoke about, there were challenges at school and home, often resulting in avoidance of school, work, inconsistent performance in school, and emotional fatigue in different ways. Further understanding the process behind it led to specific cognitive bottlenecks that were there and present and impactful. That leads to targeted support, improved engagement, reducing stress, and better alignment of the expectations. The turning point. Deeper understanding supports our ability to give the right type of intervention. Because if we just treat the behavior, we might be going down the wrong path. It gives meaningful accommodations and supports, ones that actually help the child feel success. It allows us to bring more consistent strategies across and between home and school. And it forms our overall advocacy for the child and collaboration with other providers and school teams. To review some key takeaways here, many learning and behavioral challenges have neurological roots. So the brain-based challenge behind the behavior. Similar behaviors can reflect different underlying needs. School evaluations and neuropsychological ones serve different but complementary roles in this process. And understanding the supports that are needed and understanding those supports leads to better collaboration and outcomes overall. Now, these are the stories that the children tell themselves. In my line of work, I often spend some time talking to the child directly about how they feel they're doing, how happy they feel, how safe they feel. And these are the questions that children ask themselves. Am I smart? Am I capable? Why does this feel harder for me than others? And just like we are creating those narratives for them when we see those behaviors of oh, they're being dramatic, or this is unmotivated, or they're just not applying themselves, they're bright, they're gifted, they'll get it. All those things that we tell ourselves and we create stories, simultaneously, children are creating their own stories. And this is where their academic performance can affect confidence. It can affect their mood, can affect peer relationships, and even family dynamics. So the longer a child struggles without clarity, the more likely we are to see secondary negative consequences like anxiety, depression, behavior, or emotional escalation. And I'll end by saying you are the author of your child's story. Parents have such a huge, huge power in this. And every child is writing a story about themselves, but you are the secret author of that, behind that. The struggle can be a chapter and not the whole story. Understanding behind the scenes can change what the storyline looks like. The clarity that you bring to that can change what that means for them. And you can help them write what comes next for them. And so the narrative that you craft matters. And the words you use matter. And that's where I think this understanding really helps us create the support that a child needs and create the right story foundation for them. That's the end of my talk, but I wanted to leave some room for discussion and questions. I think I saw some things come through the chat. Just exit.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Rangamanar. I mean, what an amazing conversation. And I have so much passion, as a parent myself. And I think, it's so important for us to understand because it is unintentional, but it's still our frustration does project on the kids and our children. Sometimes I think we expect our children to behave better than adults. I've seen that, early on with the expectations that we do place on our kids, and especially I do have a 2E child, so they're so smart, and then there's this understanding, and so just to share my personal experience with all you parents and caregivers out there. It is so important for us to pause and really understand this and not make those assumptions because our children are internalizing 10 times fold because they already feel that they don't fit in. They already feel that they don't belong. They don't understand why it's not getting, why it's so difficult. I know with my son with math, sometimes he'll perseverate for 2 hours and then get it done in 10 minutes. I'm like, why did we have to go through the 2 hours of a breakdown to just doing it in 10 minutes? And I really, I've had to self-reflect on how I'm approaching him and supporting him in those conversations. And I just want to give kudos to all the parents because I know it's tough, and I know, every day what we're kind of going through and how we work with our kids. But I do believe it also does start with us, of just giving that grace, because the supports like what you're providing is amazing and wonderful and needed as well, but also how we are doing that in supporting our children as parents. And I'm not a coach, I'm not a psychologist. All the services of Guiding Bright Minds are free, but there are parent coaches out there, and there's opportunities to talk to those professionals as well while your child maybe gets the tools they need. I just encourage parents to consider that as well, because that's helped me so
Yeah.
much in how I approach. So what advice would you give to parents too? Like, what's a couple key things that we can do to help support or change our narrative? Because that's so crucial for our kids that are also under so much stress and pressure. I'm going to go back on mute just because I know I might have some loud background noise.
Sure, sure. That's a great question. I think it's about, you know, I do think conversations with your child are important. Understanding what's hard for them and listening to them when they say what's hard for them. Knowing and watching kind of their behavior through schoolwork approach to it, even if they're performing really well. At what cost, at what effort, at what emotional bandwidth are they doing that? And if you're seeing a challenge with that, I think it's important to understand what's driving that, and really help them get the supports within the school that they need to help them succeed. You know, my theory of children is often that if they can succeed, they do. And if they are not succeeding in the ways that we, define success in school and at home, why? And what's driving that? It's usually not. Very, very few cases are behavior driven because they're wanting to be oppositional or they don't want to succeed. A child wants to feel success in the eyes of their parent, their teacher, and if they can't, there's usually something going awry beneath that is holding them back from being able to. And so we want to unlock that or give the support provided underneath it. So just keeping that in mind. And we're human too. Parents are human. And we probably, when we were in school, didn't get all that support and didn't really have a space to tell our parents, hey, I'm not doing so well in this and I'm not sure why. And I think that there's a great power in being able to correct that experience in a way of what we weren't afforded and pay it forward to our kids. So when they say something's going on, listen to them and try to understand what's happening behind it without just keeping the expectations or the performance output at the foreground of that.
Yes, thank you so much. I do want to reiterate because I've seen a few questions come in. We will be sending the recording and we will be sending the presentation. Somebody did make a comment about this information is super important for new educators to learn about, especially in public school settings. You know, would Guiding Bright Minds or Horizon Neuropsychological Services consider professional development? Absolutely. I know there are a lot of organizations that offer professional development to schools. I think hopefully one day in the school systems in the United States, executive function will be a core foundation. It should be. It's mind-boggling. It's not understanding all of this. I know as an adult, I mean, suffer from poor executive function skills at times. So it is such a needed skill, but there is a lot out there. And there's so much education that needs to be done in talking and working. And there, of course, there's some that are schools that are more receptive to having professional development than others, but there is a lot of effort out there to help with the education and training. Somebody also, so thank you for pointing that out, Nicole, and asking about that. I think that is an excellent topic. Because when my son was experiencing some of the frustrations with school and was in the principal's office, and I'm like, why are we doing this to our kids? But the truth is our teachers aren't taught this, and that needs to be a foundational change. But the more we collaborate, have these conversations, talk about it, I've seen growth and I've seen progress being made, which is also exciting. Somebody did ask about teens assessment or getting them assessed. There's a lot of different ways to get assessed, but I'll let you talk about that and just educate on the assessment and evaluation process.
Sure. Yeah. As a neuropsychologist, I see kids from the ages of 3 all the way up through college age. And what we do is first we have a meeting with parents to understand the concerns, understand the background history. Then we have a testing day that involves measures of all areas of main core thinking skills, including overall intellectual ability, language, attention and executive functioning, learning and memory, academic skills, as well as emotional functioning, social functioning, and there is time there as well where we do a one-on-one interview with the child to understand how they feel home is going, school is going, feelings, friends, and gather their opinions. We gather opinions from teachers as well, or any school-based testing that's been done, or other testing that's been done. And then we put it all together into one picture from all these data sources to give the best explanation for why what is happening. And sometimes that's diagnostic, of course, like we orient around that as psychologists. But to me, it's more about where we go from that and what that opens up and why that diagnosis is the best explanation, because it opens up that door for treatment, for service, and the right kind of treatment and service. And you know, more and more as we get to that those teenage years, I try to involve the child in that feedback as well. By even like late elementary school through high school, I'm usually having a one-on-one session with the child also. Sometimes the parent is there, or I'm equipping the parent with what they can give their child about that, because I am so wanting that narrative to be as grounded as it can be in truth, and not have the child spin their own stories or narratives that are false and can be really harmful if they stick around.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other questions coming in, and I know we're at 102. So, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you for everyone who joined today. We appreciate your time. I hope this was useful. We do one a month. I am also getting ready to send out a parent survey. So, if you go to our website, you can sign up as a free parent champion, caregiver champion to our newsletter. We'll be sending it out. We want to hear back from you, and we want to know what topics are you interested in? What are you looking for? What other sports supports can be out there for you? So thank you all for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Dr. Rangamanar. Sorry. Thank you so much for your time. All right. We'll talk to everyone later. Bye.